I want to begin this discussion today on the cultivation of transfer culture in the New African community. There was a wise man by the name of George Leslie Jackson that once said, "A sense of community is a prerequisite to revolution. After the fact of fascist demobilization, they will never hand us a ready-made revolutionary situation. The level of our existence will grind on as it is forever, with each year bringing a few more things from the flea market, and each recession taking them all away. The illusion of prosperity, or in our case, the hope of prosperity, will always be programmed into the system. They have learned to fear us. We must rebuild the sense of community, class consciousness. It was destroyed with the emergence of fascism and its expanding military-industrial-based economy, and the consumer's flea market, the basis of continued compromise. If we give the people something to hold, if we address ourselves to their needs, they will act in defense of the communal projects as they extend into the economic interest of the enemy state. The flea market does not meet all of the people's demands. Every vacuum that exists is a political issue. Politics and war are inseparable in the fascist state. A lot of people, when they read George and they read this statement by George, they didn't know what George was talking about. The comrade George was talking about transfer culture. The ideological assimilation to the ruling class in America. What I mean by that is subordination to the patriarchal, authoritarian mass psychology, racism, classism, xenophobia, etc. It's the foundation upon which mass support for the maintenance of domestic imperialism and socioeconomic exploitation rests in the U.S. The law of the unity and struggle of opposites, the first law of dialectics, dictates if this state of affairs is to be transformed, the masses must undergo a contrary psychosocial process, a liberating process, whereby the institutional conditioning of the masses' character structure is interrupted and reversed, transforming their fear of freedom, which lies at the root of all fascist mass psychology, into a hunger, an insatiable thirst for freedom, which no force can overcome. This transformative process we call revolution. Prerequisite to any successful revolutionary effort is the cultivation of transfer culture among the people waging such a struggle. This is especially true of the New African national colony in America, whose struggle against capitalist exploitation and white supremacy has no parallel in human history for intensity, brutality, and duration. Revolutionary ideology, like the conditions we dictate our needs, is constantly changing to adapt to new social realities. New African revolutionary nationalism, NARN, has evolved far beyond its founders and many of the giants of revolutionary social struggle across historical history. We live in a brave new world, requiring the adaptation of new realities. Chairman Mao and Uncle Ho did not have to contend with infrared global satellite surveillance arrays capable of seeing what brand of tennis shoes one is wearing from space, anywhere on Earth. Lenin and Trotsky did not factor in the racist psychological component of white genetic survival or the effects of white supremacy on the remainder of the human population, i.e. slavery, genocide, cultural annihilation, nuclear nightmare diplomacy, etc., when developing their utopian communist vision. Hewitt and Comrade George didn't have to contend with multi-jurisdictional databases linked to the World Wide Web, giving the forces of reaction the ability to alter or examine one's life in cyberspace. How could Marcus Garvey or Che Guevara foresee the advent of stealth drones and intelligent weapon systems on the field of battle, enforcing the will of the oppressor? They couldn't, and they did. To successfully cultivate transfer culture within the New African community, we must have a firm grasp of its caretakers, revolutionary leadership. When we speak of revolutionary leadership, we are speaking of those elements within the community who not only understand the fundamental class, race, and socioeconomic contradictions, but also the currents of the times, capabilities and shortcomings of the revolutionary apparatus, the state and abilities of the tools of reaction, and how to synthesize all of these into the effective strategic and tactical approach capable of moving social conditions toward revolutionary social change. Comrades, we have left too much to chance and assumed too much was being taught and learned that wasn't. And in our complacency, the world moved on, leaving us scrambling to reassess and regroup. In any protracted struggle, such as New African National Liberation Revolution, there are lulls in engagement when the forces of social progress must regroup and reassess the struggle and make the necessary adjustments to carry the cause forward to its next stage of development. This is the point in history we find ourselves in now. The law of criticism, self-criticism, dictates that we acknowledge, while we have been scrambling to correct many internal contradictions which plague our communities, the enemies of the people have been moving their fascist agenda ever forward. Success will depend on our capacity to build an autonomous infrastructure capable of sustaining a long-standing, protracted struggle. And this begins with establishing transfer culture in and amongst our communities, something which can occur as long as we are plagued by the hydra of instability in our New African communities. It is here where trained cadre must focus the NARN party's influence and its organizing efforts. Tools of reaction and how to synthesize these into the effective strategic and tactical approach capable of moving social conditions toward New African revolution. The reason transfer culture is so essential at this crucial point in the historical development of our struggle is it remains the doorway to gold culture. When we speak of gold culture, we are speaking of a realignment of every aspect of a people's activities, their labor, their economic activity, their religions, their politics, their military capability, their sexual behavior, etc., 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 toward a specific goal, i.e., revolutionary transformation of fascist society. The process by which a people moves from viewing life through the prism of the dominant culture, in this instance, capitalist white supremacy, on to seeing life from the perspective of the gold culture, in this case, New African revolutionary nationalism / revolutionary scientific socialism, is called transfer culture. Transfer culture connotates moving from one way of life to another, more progressive, interest-oriented way of life. Party organizers must go out into our communities and identify both our collective interest and the points of instability hand in hand with the people. This is where the vast majority of us make this mistake. We assess the people's contradictions without the people being involved in that process. We must convince them their international class interests lie with the other oppressed and exploited people of the world, and not the imperialistic interest of the dominant culture they inhabit. Unity and cooperation, the hallmarks of egalitarianism, must become the fabric of the people's social consciousness. As we are confronted with the ongoing slaughter of unarmed New Africans by the capitalist state's police forces, self-defense education becomes a vital component of ideological struggle. The desire to resist, to rather die on one's feet than live on one's knees, must become a religion and ethos of our people. Show them they have more to gain by seizing and transforming the means of production than being wage slaves, and they will move toward this. Much of our instability in the New African community is rooted in our dependence on the oppressive state for everything, from our food supply to our security. It is the classic strategy of underdevelopment. to provide your enemy with false strength in order to create real weakness. We must forge alternative socialist institutions and secure community initiatives where the people rely on the party and themselves for their basic needs and not the state and its flea market. Instill in them the repugnancy of relying on the state and the gloriousness of self-determination, and the people will organize to address their material needs and support the revolutionary infrastructure. Implement these cultural values among our youth and our children, and the culture will move from unconscious dependency to revolution, to a culture of aims and objectives, where the thought process by which dialectical materialism and revolutionary science is as common as consumer materialism is today. The cultivation of transfer culture is a multifaceted process, one which is, in many ways, primarily psychological. A series of illuminations which leads to the inevitable realization that social conditions at every point of human activity must change. Yet this process has its opposing force, the authoritarian mass psychology in its various forms. When a people's perception of reality and actual reality do not mirror one another, the flaw will always reside in the perceptive faculties of the people. When speaking of how we perceive reality, one must understand this is the origin of all action and inaction in a society. Thought precedes action. Action dictates our circumstances. Circumstances created dictate our reality. Yet what cannot be overlooked in this equation is thought is based on perception. For example, someone with poor vision may perceive they are seeing an unattractive person of the opposite sex. But once their vision is corrected with glasses or contact lenses, may find themselves looking upon a vision of beauty. When we speak of the absence of mass transfer culture, when that development amongst the New African in America is lacking, in the face of the reality we suffer through on a day-to-day basis, it's clear its absence on a mass scale does not mirror its need. This is because, to a greater or lesser degree, the masses' perception of reality is flawed, filtered through the prism of patriarchal authoritarian mass psychosis, the unique character structure of capitalist white supremacy in America. But before we can correct this social anomaly, we must ask how. How is it the people can't see they dying in droves, being in prison, exploited, infected, manipulated, used, and preyed upon by the same system they unwittingly support every single day? How can they not see they are living poor, butchered half-lives while playing Xbox and blowing blunts? There are only so many ways perceptions can be obfuscated. One, there could be a gross aberration in the perceptive organ, in this case, the mind and consciousness of the people. Two, there could be something blocking their perception, such as the bourgeois counterculture and prestige of the state. Three, the perception of a people can be being misdirected in such a fashion as what they believe they are seeing is not actually what is, either by their own subconscious mind's refusal to accept objective reality so it creates a conveniently more comfortable one, or by the intentional deception and socioeconomic manipulation of the state. Four, all of the above. It is my contention that option 4 is how transfer culture has been thus far precluded in the New African community as a whole. For over 400 years, New Africans in America were enslaved, beaten, butchered, and terrorized. Yet during the Civil Rights Movement, New Africans continued to suffer these same beatings, lynchings, water hoses, attacks by dogs, and brutality in order to secure the right to put the minds of their children in the hands of the same people who have been brutally mistreating them since making contact with them on these shores in 1619. What did this great struggle for integration produce for New Africans in public schools of America? It produced Ward Connerly's, Clarence Thomas's, Condoleezza Rice's, crackheads, gangbangers, and hoochie mamas. Yet bourgeois elements like Julian Bond had the audacity and unmitigated gall to ask, what's happening to our youth? This entire illustration connotates a mass pathology on the part of not only most new Africans in America, but all poor people and people of color in this country. Only a madman will put the minds of his children in the hands of his enemies. This psychological aberration has been coined menticide, i.e. mental suicide. Among one of the major impediments to the new African nation developing a comprehensive transfer culture is the people's inability to think beyond the boundaries of the dominant culture. This is a core aberration in the perceptive faculties of the people. Our collective unconscious drive to identify with the interest, the morals, the values, and desires of the capitalist class runs contrary to our own interests. We are in a very precarious position as the new African underclass in America. We have the distinction of being the super oppressed by the dominant culture and capitalist class, while at the same time being a super exploiter of our own brothers and sisters in the third world through our participation in and enjoying the fruits of this vampiric market economy. Here is where the psychological conditioning of the success brainwashing method and the Willie Lynch legacy are at their most insidious. The masses can see and feel themselves being killed and exploited, but are so engaged in the system itself, they are unable to collectively articulate how or organize to move against it. Their minds tell them, because their actions demonstrate this on daily practice, they must adhere to the dictates of the dominant culture. They got to get paid and have conditioned against cooperation, unity, and independence, which is the slave mentality. Because the dominant culture reproduces itself in the character structure of those subject to its irrational mass psychology, those subject to it also develop an irrational character structure. We don't respond to these conditions in rational ways, precisely because we don't view them as contradictions, but instead, it's the natural order of things. We believe these poor butchered half-lives that we live are normal. Here also is why racism is such a vital component of the capitalist arrangement. It conceals collective class interests and precludes broad class cooperation through racial antagonisms. It is irrational for us to continue to participate in the capitalist gladiator game of scrambling for the crumbs of wage slavery in our old race-specific camps, as opposed to cooperating with one another to organize our own economic counterforce, which would serve to liberate us from this Roman Colosseum of national and class oppression. For example, in ghettos, barrios, and urban areas across this country, new African and Latino sisters and brothers are in open conflict over jobs, housing, and political positions within the dead end of the capitalist socioeconomic and political system. More disturbing, in some regions, this is developing the open racial hostility. This latter has found some of its perpetuation, at least in the southwest and western regions of the U.S., in conflicts stemming from hostilities in prison. The very origins of some prison-based new African groups that arose amongst imprisoned underclass subjects were tied as greatly to defending new African prisoners from misguided Latino and white prisoners as they were to race, class, cultural politics. As such conflicts continued and expanded, these prisoners were released back to the communities they came from, and their attitudes and biases cultivated by the state and the socially hostile microcosm of prison were released with them. Conflicts in middle and high schools between new African and Latino students in the past decade are children seeking to emulate their older brothers and sisters, their big homies. In spite of these antagonisms, recent years have given way to recognition of the nature of our common foe, a recognition that also found its origins as a material force in prison. The Pelican Bay D Short Corridor Collective's agreement to end hostilities, which ended that in California. They recognized that the capitalist state was their common nemesis and acted accordingly by galvanizing 3 historic hunger strikes to abolish shoe torture units in California and inspire social justice struggles across this nation and the world. The fact of the matter is, the same capitalist structure that is oppressing New Africans is oppressing Latinos. The same police and prison industrial slave complex that is brutalizing and preying on New African communities is preying on Latino communities. Though New Africans are the last hired and first fired, Latinos, you ain't too far behind. The reason New African and Latino communities have spilled blood on this common ground instead of building on it is the capitalist culture in the U.S. encourages division and competition between oppressed nationalities. Here we find the success brainwashing method manifested into 2 distinct oppressed nationalities. Each one is viciously pursuing their own individual place on a higher rung of the capitalist ladder at the expense of the other, as opposed to struggling against the system itself, against this ruling class that is responsible for their collective oppression, never realizing that ladder leads only to the slave pens. Though New Africans and Latinos have a similar historic, political, economic, class, and cultural experience with the American productive system, they have difficulty seeing it because their minds have been so thoroughly conditioned against any organizing effort which would or could threaten the interests of the capitalist class or its established status quo. What must be understood is if the system of capitalism is to ensure its survival, racism must be preserved to promote conflict and preclude dialogue between oppressed people. This phenomenon has negatively impacted class politics, the labor movement, national liberation revolution dating back to the common plight of African and Native slaves and European indentured servants in the 13 original colonies. This contradiction is literally hundreds of years old. Just as it has taken centuries to warp the perceptive organs of the masses, i.e. their minds, it will take time for a sufficient number of the people to be re-educated to move towards transfer culture. The first step in the process of transfer culture is developing a functional understanding of our common cause. Revolutionary scientific socialism is dependent on unity. Unity is a process. It does not spontaneously spring forth from mere need or desire. Not on this scale. If that was the case, we'd already have it. However, once attained, it is a powerful force. Let's run an experiment to illustrate my point. I want you to place your hand before you and open it. What do you see? You see a palm and 5 digits, correct? If I ask you to slam your hand forward to break a board in this configuration, most of you would break your fingers and do little to no damage to the board. Now slowly close your hand. Feel each digit contracting into a fist. Squeeze it tight. Now, if you struck with the requisite focus and intent, the board would break with ease and your hand would be virtually undamaged. Why is this so? This reason is simple. Though the same hand was used, it was divided in one scenario and united in the next. You see, unity is strength. As a process, unity requires 2 things: dialogue and commitment. If the New African collectivist develops transfer culture on a broad scale, we must begin a broad-scale dialogue. The people must know why revolution is in their interest, why scientific socialism will provide for their basic needs more efficiently and effectively than capitalism, why the systems of capitalism and white supremacy and revolutionary scientific socialism from a NARN perspective cannot exist on the same planet in peace. We must dialogue around how best to organize ourselves for success. and the strategic and tactical path we will take to reach those objectives. We must then commit to this common set of ideas and live it in our daily lives if our unity is to succeed. As a people, we must condition ourselves to move democratically, i.e., democratic centralism, to always subordinate individual interests to our collective aims, to keep our objectives foremost in our minds, and let them guide our conduct. Through all of this, we must know that we can win. This will take time. It's going to take work and true commitment on the part of the revolutionary apparatus. This process of unity must include the awareness of our collective class interests in general and our particular New African national interests specifically, all within the worldview of our international class interests, the global revolution. We have not won until we have won the world. A Taoist sage once said, the journey of 100 miles begins with a single step. And the same phrase also translates, a journey of 100 miles begins at your feet. We must adopt a similar outlook. The changing of an entire world begins with the changing of a single mind, my own. If the people's minds can be developed to the point where they can perceive reality as is, transfer culture will well be a step closer to reality. Another possible arbiter of the people's perception is that which blocks their perception of what the true nature of the forces working upon them are. The American counterculture of Hollywood glamour, consumer materialism, and gangster chic has so thoroughly blinded most people to what is truly central to their own interests that most can't even see a need for social change, let alone a need for transfer culture. There are only so many hours in a day if the people's minds and emotions are constantly engaged by the activities and frivolities of the U.S. consumer counterculture. How can they make a concrete analysis of what is occurring around them and to them, beyond some rudimentary oppression consciousness and cursory explanations provided by state-controlled media? Let's analyze this phenomenon closely. This is very, very important if you're serious about cultivating transfer culture. Think about this. The people must sell their labor if they are to survive in a capitalist economy, competing with other workers for job security and advancement. This requires a significant commitment in time and effort. But wait, there are social conformities one must adhere to in the United States if they are to be considered socially attractive. Gotta hit the gym. Make certain you're rocking the latest fashions and do what you got to do to afford them. Oh, but wait, you are what you ride. Got to have a nice car. But did you hear about the new games on Xbox? Got to get your game on. Did Sonny get down with Carly on General Hospital? Can't miss your favorite soaps. Then there's Big Brother, Love and Hip Hop, Power, Stranger Things, and all your other favorite TV shows. What about the bling? Got to get your shine on. Why, you ask? Because MTV, BET, the homies in the hood, the honeys on the block, the lady in the shop, the guy at the gym, they all said you have to. But what about the war on terrorism? Well, the news said they were bad guys. And you saw Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie True Lies. And those were some bad guys. So you go and vote for this guy and give up that civil liberty because you want to be safe. And the news said they're trying to protect you. And after all of this deceiving and delusion, scrambling and striving and consuming and competing, the minds of the people are perpetually engaged. Their priorities placed in the ruling class's favor. Their perception, the very faculties of their mind, are blocked by a constant bombardment of non-interest essential bullshit. As long as they can keep the people with a color TV, a car in the driveway, you crying over Boromir's Last Stand and Lord of the Rings, or laughing at the latest celebrity gossip on TMZ, As long as they can keep you working yourself to death for that promotion and stuck for hours playing Grand Theft Auto, they don't have to worry about you opposing the fascist laws they pass, the imperialism they're expanding, your freedoms they're curtailing, or your lives that they've taken. You're otherwise occupied. You're unable to see past your occupation to what they're doing right in your face with your consent and your cooperation. Some of you will decry this analysis, stating the people ain't that blind, they seem. They don't know that they being oppressed. They just haven't organized quite yet. And to you, I say there's a difference between oppression consciousness and revolutionary consciousness, which guides the cultivation of transfer culture. When a person can articulate the condition of his or her oppression, then one is conscious of that oppression. We see this in millions of new Africans in America. Yet they are unaware of the correct expression of that consciousness or the harm they do by practicing an incomplete consciousness, both to themselves and the cause of the New African Revolution. It is true, a little knowledge can be dangerous. There are some of these sisters and brothers who are admired as being conscious. The sister that declares America will never liberate black folks is conscious of oppression, but not victory. The brother who makes a movie about Africans being beaten on the decks of a slave ship, or the TV personality who gives some money to the NAACP to, quote, fight racism, or the child who perceives the difference in economic position between her family and her white friends, or the high schooler who writes stories about Africa and wears dreadlocks, may all exhibit consciousness of oppression. But none of this is consciousness of victory, revolutionary consciousness. This oppression consciousness ensures that liberation is postponed until national class and social consciousness rises and is mobilized by a victorious historical will. A consciousness of victory shows the Africans on the slave ship overcoming their tormentors and sailing home. It shows the TV personality pledging those funds to community-based and community-owned self-sufficiency initiatives. It shows these children determining to improve the state of their own communities as opposed to lusting after their friends. It shows us victorious. This is why the professional revolutionary is the eternal optimist. Victory is always foremost in our minds, so it is very difficult to block the perception of the truly committed. Struggle itself becomes oppression consciousness when one cannot see our victory. The true character of a people, it lies in how they relate their history to their present and their future. To be aware of how hard the system of capitalism has made the life of the people is to be aware of oppression on a very basic level. It's like waking in the morning from a deep sleep. When you first wake up, you wipe the sleep from your eyes and try focusing until eventually your eyes clear and your environment is revealed. Victorious consciousness, revolutionary consciousness, ensures you see the world clearly and respond accordingly. Such a perspective imbues us with the confidence necessary to take on any challenge and manufacture a path to victory in spite of being mired in a system which provides no path to liberation for the oppressed. Transfer culture, in the final analysis, is the cultivation of rational thought by an oppressed people, in this case, New African people in America. The hard truth is, you are not Americans. You will never be Americans. And you will always be considered inferior, less valued, expendable, disposable within the context of American culture, social, economic, political, and military life. That is the truth. Capitalism in general, and American capitalism in particular, is death and human misery to black folks. It's that simple. This realization, a simple acknowledgement of the truth, is the first step on the path of liberation. Once these salient truths are understood and accepted on a functional level, it is then that the work of moving towards a new, interest-oriented, independent way of life can begin for New African people. This means not only participating in the building of our autonomous infrastructure and developing the means to defend it, but also disconnecting from the infrastructure and consumer counterculture of the oppressive state by relying on our autonomous infrastructure for the necessities and basics for life, the very basis for our move to a new, more progressive and viable way of life. As our transfer culture grows, progressively eliminating the negative social and economic conditions which have arose as norms for our national oppression, our revolutionary gold culture will become more clearly defined. The national character of our independent New African nation becomes more concrete, and our trajectory towards genuine freedom, justice, equality, and human rights for all moves closer to realization. Transfer culture is and must remain the most central and urgent aspiration of any and every man, woman, or organization who claims revolutionary authenticity. Think on these things, comrades. They are cause for great meditation.